Welcome to this episode of Can We Talk About Your WordPress Projects? Today's episode, as all episodes, are brought to you by the WP Project Managers Academy because that's our thing. And I will tell you more about that at the end of this presentation. But today, Michael Gburski, one of our students and one of our group members, has joined us to help us understand the new Google Core Web Vitals or Web Core Vitals?
Core Web Vitals.
Core Web Vitals. I'm sorry, it's a day after vacation and my mind is mush. Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic because it's all about Google's new way of looking at more than just SEO and your content and all of that in terms of search results. Michael is going to share that stuff with us today because he's done the research and understands it. And that's a big thing. So Michael, why don't you start out by just telling everybody kind of who you are and what your background is, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Okay. I am Mike Gburski. I own a business called JadeFire Development. I have been involved in building sites on the WordPress platform for a better part of a decade. Been involved in marketing and specifically local SEO for that amount of time. Owned my own business now for about 5 years. Prior, I was working with an agency, and it's been an interesting ride. SEO is one of those things that if you ever want to use a career path or a focus that is ever changing, this is the one to go for. It's definitely that. You never quite know. Google will never admit to how many factors are in their algorithms. Rumors are anywhere from 600 to over 1,000. So when people say, well, this is going to make all the difference, it's really a small piece of a much larger. There are certain things that get more value in Google's minds at certain times, and then they adjust. And as soon as you think you figured it out, they change the rules.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I always try to figure out what the rules are.
You're a rule figure outer. Okay. So
problem solver extraordinaire.
Yeah, there you go. So can you just explain what Core Web Vitals is? I mean, like the old way of Google ranking and how this is going to change things. Like, what's the difference between UX and UI and how that matters into this whole thing?
It's all about Google's changing their focus. Understand what Google's role is to rule the world as far as I'm concerned, and in the process make an enormous amount of money. And they provide us with a free tool called Google that was our search engine. And their role in that is to provide us with the most relevant result to our query as quickly as possible. The more we use their tool, ads they can sell through local search ads, AdWords, you name it. They've always been about getting the best result the fastest. And what they're starting to do is they're starting to factor to those results user experience. Because for a long time, it didn't matter what that was. UI is kind of the interface. It's the thing you see. X is the actual experience behind that. It's how you interact with the web page, how your experience with gathering the information is. They have for a long time through Page Speed Insights had roughly 6 different criteria that they use to identify good user experience on desktop and mobile. The Core Web Vitals are the newest portion of that, and they're saying basically these 3 things: largest contentful paint, first and input delay, and cumulative layout shift are the top priorities.
Okay,
they're all part of it. They're just...
Your audio is breaking up just a little bit. So would you say the last 3 sentences again? I don't think there's anything we can do about it. And I figured out what my video issue was. I'm having video issues. Michael's having audio issues. It's still 2020. Life sucks. Okay, so let me tell you back what I think I heard you say, okay? Which is that they're incorporating user experience into their algorithm. That's what Core Web Vitals is at its core.
Correct.
Pardon the pun.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically what they're doing. They're basically incorporating your experience with the website as their ranking factor.
Okay, so UX, for those who might be watching and don't know, stands for user experience. UI stands for user interface. So your user interface is what determines the user experience. Would that be an accurate way to describe those two things?
The user interface is the foundation. It's the thing you see. A good way to think about it is then you have a digital thermostat in your house. You go to that screen and you look at the screen. What you see on the screen is the user interface. The user experience is how do I interact with that, and how easy is it for me to get that initial screen where it just shows me and if the heat's on and whatever other basic information, to getting in and setting a schedule so my house is set to the right temperature while I'm awake, while I'm sleeping. In the middle of winter, it's heating. In the middle of summer, it's cooling. That's all about user experience. And Google is doing that with our websites from the experience of someone comes to your website, the page loads, and what information is being loaded, how quickly is it available to the user. More importantly, how quickly is the forms or buttons, links interactable? How quickly click that form button and that lead magnet? Google's monitoring all of that.
Wow. Well, that's kind of scary. What are the ramifications of this new thing to mobile versus desktop?
Everything Google's doing is mobile. It is all mobile first. All of this will matter because your mobile user experience, your core web vitals for your mobile version of your website will affect the overall ranking of you and your search results. Google's been running, still are, I think, two different search. Basically, they've been running a set for desktop and they've been running a set for mobile. They're basically saying we're done with desktop. 50 to 70% of searches begin on a mobile device. On our mobile devices, we're just going to focus everything on the user experience and the information on the mobile version of websites to create rankings.
Okay, so if my desktop version of my website is super perfect, but there are usability issues on my mobile version. I know I've been getting some of these notifications, right? Like your mobile version, the elements are too close together, the text is too small to read, stuff like that. Is that from Google? I know it's from Google, but is that from their Core Web Vitals algorithm thing? Because I've never gotten this stuff before. I've only been getting it recently.
Yeah, they added into Search Console, they added in a Crux report, a Chrome user experience report, which is tracking user data specific to your website, mobile devices, and using that data and through their Core Web Vitals to make those determinations. You can still use PageSpeed Insights or their Lighthouse plugin. The difference between what you're going to see in the Core Web Vitals report inside your Search Console is that data is specific to you or users. The results and the data that you're going to see on Page Insights, or if you use the Lighthouse Chrome extension or anything that relies on the Lighthouse data, that's all lab-based data. So that's the internet as a whole for your type of website at the worst possible percentile. So basically, when you look at PageSpeed Insights or a Lighthouse report, you're going to see what Google is. These are the worst things on your site that the user on the oldest device with the slowest connection is going to suffer. If you use that lab data, then you're going to provide a much better experience overall. But if you go into the Chrome Web Vitals report that's inside your Google Search Console, it will show specific issues to your website. It'll show you what your cumulative layout shift is and if it's bad. show you the pages that it's on, and you can run Chrome Dev Tools. You can run a bunch of different tools to help identify where those issues are, and then go in there and resolve them.
Okay, I've just moved on to the island of overwhelm, because as I'm talking to you and wanting you to share this with all of our community, I'm of course thinking about my own website. I'm thinking about my client's website. How much work is this going to be for me to go back and check and make sure? So let me say back to you what I think you said. In terms of the way that Google determines a good user experience, is that when you click on a button, it gets served up just as quickly as, say, the homepage does. Or so how is it determining what user experience is? To me, that's such a subjective thing. So how are they making that a measurable thing?
Well, they can measure things programmatically. For example, the one you'll hear a conversation around is cumulative layout shift, abbreviated as CLS. And you the lowest possible layout shift. A good example of this is up on your mobile device. You load a news website, for example, and you start scrolling. It's heavily media and a lot of images, a lot of video, and it starts, and you're on okay, but not so good connection, and you start scrolling, you're reading the content, and then all of a sudden the page just shifts down, and you got to find your place again. That's cumulative layout shift. What happened is Google then tracks that all of that content was at this depth. Once that video loaded in of whatever, it dropped down 400 pixels, and that happened to video that was loaded on the page. That makes the cumulative layout shift for the whole page several thousand pixels. That's a good way to look at that. We've all experienced that where something's loading, we want to hit the button to get to the next page, we want to hit a link, and then something finishes loading and everything should end up in some different web page somewhere else.
So is this going to ding hard on those stupid clickbait sites where you get there, you're starting to read an article, and there's like an ad every other sentence that takes forever to load? So you go to click on whatever it was you were clicking on, and by the time you click on it, it's shifted up and you've clicked on something completely different, usually the ad. You think they're doing that on purpose?
Yes, I think they are. That's what is basically cumulative layout shift. The way to solve that is you use image dimensions. So when you're putting in that image, you tell Chrome, you tell whatever browser you're using, Safari or whatever, that image is going to be 640 pixels by 320 pixels. So when it gets to that code, it leaves a lot while the image is being loaded, but the content below it doesn't shift because it's already taken out the necessary space.
Well, I clearly have to redo all of my website. How does one check their core web vitals? I think you mentioned it. Do you want to show us that, or do you just want to tell us? Did you have anything you wanted to show at this point?
Well, I have your page speed insights up on your website. Do you want to use that?
Oh God, is it awful? Is it terrible, awful? I don't want to advertise that to the world. The cobbler's children have no shoes, y'all. I am not the best web developer in the world, but I am the best project manager on the planet. So,
all right.
Yes.
So does somebody that's watching? I'll run it on somebody.
Go ahead and show mine. Look, I need to be transparent. Go ahead and show mine.
All right.
Let me give you permission to share your screen. 1 second. Okay.
All right. So you can see page speed insights for WP roadmaps.
Uh-huh. I'm not green. I should be green.
If you can get green.
Most people can't get green.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. There's certain things you can do to help. One of those is to use a caching software, use a tool like WP Rocket or something like that.
I have WP Rocket on my site. I have WP Rocket, but I think I have caching. Is it possible for there to be caching conflicts?
Yes.
Okay. So
you also want to defer A lot of times people don't defer when they're using WP Rocket or any of these. They're scared of what the warnings tell them and they don't actually do it. You want to defer, you want to reload for Google, if you're using Google fonts or any fonts you're using. And there's a lot of stuff inside WP Rocket. You can lazy loading, make sure you use your lazy loading images.
Okay, you know what we might do, Michael, is I might get you to work on my site and do a case study for folks. I'll pay you. I'm not saying I would ask you to do it for free.
Yeah, that's fine.
But
Yeah.
just do, because this would be a good example of, look, I'm not a super tech. There's some of this technical stuff I don't fully understand. I'm not necessarily the best designer. And when I first developed WP roadmaps, there was a lot about WordPress and Elementor and setting up for mobile and all that stuff I didn't know, that I've been trying to go back and do when I'm working on a particular section of my website, to go back and fix it because I know how it's supposed to work now. But I think I may have, like, my host does caching. I have WP Rocket. Then there's one other that's possibly affecting that. And I need to ask my host about it too, because they have server level caching, but then they also provide you with a plugin. So I'm not sure. And I think that would really clear things up for a lot of people, is just to have a discussion on caching alone so that we fully understand it and that you can over cache, right? Where you're creating conflicts.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, I know what the other thing is. I'm also on Cloudflare. So all of those things, I don't know which, because somebody else set up WP Rocket for me. This is how stupid I was. Somebody in a group that was not WordPress, I think it was an entrepreneur group, and we were talking about page speed, and somebody said, oh, my cousin or my son-in-law or somebody does that. I paid the guy $150 to speed up my website. He installed WP Rocket, set it up, and then just basically disappeared. I'm using his license, and it got renewed. I don't even know what the settings are that he set and why he set them. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, so that could be conflicting with what Cloudflare is trying to do, which could be conflicting with what my host is trying to do. What do these numbers tell you right here about my site?
I'm going to come back to that in a second. I saw a comment from Trisha in the Facebook group that I wanted to answer. She's asked about what I said about fonts. So with any font that you're using, or really any resource that you're going to be pulling from a party, you want to either preload or fetch those. And if it's JavaScript, you're going to want to make sure you're either deferring that, not necessary for functionality for the initial page load. So you want to defer it to the end. A good example would be actually the script for Google Analytics. You want to defer a lot. Google Analytics tells you to put that in the head of the website. So it's loaded right at the top, but it's a third-party JavaScript resource. It can potentially hang up if not added to your website correctly. We're talking milliseconds. Slow it down. But with fonts, and you only want to load the font versions that you're using. So if you're only using the normal 400 weight of a font, and your font library is pulling in every version, every scale from 100, 300 through 900 for that font, you're adding and pulling in additional resources that aren't actually being used on your website. So you're adding page load, you're adding milliseconds of time to pull in that isn't necessary. One of the things that you'll see whenever you run a GT metrics report or any of these reports, and it's probably on here, is to defer JavaScript and CSS. That's it right there. A lot of times when I'll build a website, I'll use system resources and system fonts for that initial page load, so the page loads fast, and then have it, well, it goes the other way, but I use the custom fonts, but I'll use a fallback system fonts. So let's say, for example, I'm using Google's Roboto, but the system is Arial. The Roboto has a fallback to Arial. The page initially loads on immediate available font, so it's there, and then it will change And you'll see that too on sites. You'll see it load and then all of a sudden the content changes and the font's different. If you're not careful, it can add to your cumulative layout shift. Everything kind of feeds into each tricks that you can do to increase how quickly the page is available for your user.
Okay. That was a good question, Trisha.
The goal is everybody win to green, but sometimes it's just not worth it. Because that's the other thing you have to think about when you're building these out is what is the gain to the amount of time, effort, and expense to solve the problem.
Now, see, there's a good project management tip right there. Just because if you were going to have an A1 plus perfect site, this is the right way to do it. For you to go back and rework what you've already done, if it's not having an impact, then it's not really the most productive use of your time. Is that what you were saying?
You know, it's going to improve your number by 0.01 or something, and it's going to take you to find the image, to recrop it, to upload it, to press it, and then re-upload it. You have to take all of it with a grain of salt and say, is this really worth it?
Are there things that you would then in your mind classify as, well, here are the big things and here are the little things?
Yeah.
There are?
Yeah, it really is website specific, but a lot of it comes down to image optimization, using some sort of an image optimization plugin, or using like tiny PNG to compress your images before you upload them. It's making sure that
I use Short Pixel for that, but I also use Cloudflare CDN. Now, is a CDN helpful? Is a CDN helpful when it comes to that sort of thing?
It is, but you have to be careful because depending upon what version of Short Pixel you're using, you could be using their CDN. So you've got a double CDN thing going on, which could be causing some issues. I use Short Pixel Adapt Image version.
What kind of version you dropped out?
Adaptive Image, I think is what it's called. It's their newest version. It serves up, when available, it will serve up new generation images. So it'll serve up WebP images. Otherwise, it's doing the necessary compression and serving up the images as needed through their CDN. That's the other thing to think about with images. I mean, images are the big one. That's where a lot of people get in a lot of trouble. When you're uploading an image to your website, make sure you've cropped it to the right dimensions that it's going to be displayed. I'll take an image that they download from Adobe Stock, Shutterstock, Deposit Photos, wherever you're getting your images, and they upload it in the size they downloaded it, which could be several thousand pixels wide for a 480 pixel wide spot. At which point, then you're forcing WordPress and possibly the browser to compress and re-crop that image to fit the size. If you know that your image is going to be, the maximum size it's going to be is 640 by 480, then crop it to 640 by 480, get your image and save it in that dimension, upload it in that dimension.
So in looking at my numbers on the screen right now, which, if any of these things causes concern?
These are the page speed experience numbers that Google is using. We're using page speed insights, or we're using lab data, so we're not using data from your visitors. But you'll notice first contentful paint, not that. This one, largest contentful paint and cumulative layout shift are two core web vitals, and that's why they've got a blue badge next to them.
Ah, okay. So my cumulative layout shift is not bad.
No, it's really not.
I suspect you want lower numbers here, correct?
Yeah, so here's the Google page. This is just webdev.vitals, all of that information, and you can get serious right here. But these are your core web vitals. Largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative lift. And you've got your scores. So the largest contentful paint doesn't happen or takes 4 seconds before it's loaded, you get a poor score. How quickly that first piece of information loads, and then your shift. If we go back to yours, your largest contentful paint was 1.7 seconds. And inside Page Speed Insights, they give you these pictures. There's nothing happening in these 2 squares, and then everything starts to load in. And that's the calculator. That's how they score it.
Ah. Okay. Where are you getting this page right here? You're just going to Google Page Speed Insights and you're putting in my site.
Correct. Yep. I just put in your domain and ran analyze. And this is the desktop.
Okay. And so under the lab data, scroll back up just a little bit. Okay, so lab data, my first contextual paint, which is not part of Web Core Vitals, that's just regular stuff that's been there forever, correct? Mm-hmm. But yep. Largest contentful paint and cumulative layout shift, I'm getting a green for cumulative layout shift, but I'm getting a yellow for the largest contentful paint, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
it's 1.7. It's 0.7 seconds after the page loads.
I'm not going to worry about it because I'm still yellow. But if I wanted to try and improve this score for largest contentful paint, what would you look at?
Pull up Chrome DevTools and run under the Rinse tab, run that analysis, which will show you where your largest contentful paint is. Would you like me to do that?
Now? Sure.
I can.
Sure. I know it'll be helpful to me. I think it'll be helpful to everyone else too.
I don't know if that's sharing, so.
Yeah, I'm seeing my website now. Is that where you meant to go? Okay.
So I wanted to make sure I have DevTools. This is DevTools. You get to it by either right-clicking and inspect, or you can use the shortcut, which is on Command-Alt or Command-Option-I. But the easiest thing to remember is right-click, inspect. It will take you here to DevTools. Typically, this is what you'll see first, the Elements tab. If there's a tab that's active that you want to have active, you come into Preferences and you can have it, you turn it there somewhere. Oops, sorry, it's here. More tools. So the 3 little dots on the right, more tools. So if performance isn't up there for you, that's how you would set that up. You just open up Performance tab and then run. Let it run. It's going to reload your page, and then it will provide us with some information. And see how your page shifted a little bit?
Yeah.
When it was loading? That's the kind of stuff that Google's tracking and will be evident in this report once it processes. Okay. This is what you see. Looks like Greek, right? You've got 2 layout shifts. If you hover over, do you see how that area is being highlighted in your page?
Huh?
You got 1 layout shift for that image and another layout shift elsewhere on the page. I'm going to make that disappear for a second, see if I can find it. The menu is causing a layout shift.
Huh.
You hover over the layout shift and it will show you where it is so that you can start diagnosing where the problem is. Your largest contentful paint is also that large image area. Your first contentful paint, let's see. I don't know where that is. Where is that?
We're only looking at the homepage right now. It's not looking at the whole website. Is that right?
No, each page will have different results. We've also got a handy dandy screenshots up here that we can look at that were recorded as the page loaded.
Yeah, so it's
at some
loading
point,
smaller and then expanding. It's like the image is not loading first, is what it should do. I've been noticing
and
that.
it is, but it looks like at some point the image is there, then it goes away and comes back.
Yes, and it comes back in a weird size and goes back to full.
Yeah, it's in that full size. It drops down to this. It's cropped into a boxed layout, basically, and then reloads into its full size.
You know what? I think I know why this is. I'm not a CSS expert by any means. When it comes to editing CSS, I use CSS Editor, used to be called Yellow Pencil. I can't remember what. CSS Visual Site Editor or something like that. And I think it puts that CSS somewhere different. I've got CSS that's loading in the regular customizer, and I've got CSS that's loading through this tool. Now I can take the CSS out of the tool and load it into the customizer. Do you think that's what's causing this problem? Is that the CSS is getting loaded one place and then getting loaded again somewhere else?
Yeah, you see this with builders too. There's something inside the builder. There's custom CSS in a module or a block that's being set that gets overwritten as it runs through its process and then is reset. You'll see in Cascades too as what the order of that style sheet is being loaded into the website. We'll make this too. There's a lot of possible options.
So you mentioned something, and although it's not this topic, it's related to this topic, and that is mobile indexing. I know I've asked you this question before, and I'm sorry I'm asking it again, but every time I read someone's explanation of this, I get a different take on what that actually means. Let's take the bakery down the street who hasn't updated their website in 10 years. It's still the kind of website that when you bring it up on your phone, you've got to smush it out. You've got to scroll to the left, scroll to the right to even see the menu. Where does that fall in terms of it's not mobile responsive, so they're not going to index the mobile version of the site?
No, Google will still index what's there, the content of the site. This is my understanding. Google will still index the content of the site, but what will hurt them is their experience. The fact that the button close, the font's too small, all those different things that you've mentioned, that's what's going to hurt them in their ranking. It's rumored that Google is going to use an icon. Nobody knows what or if, but it's rumored that they're going to put an icon next to your Google search results, much like they do right now with the AMP icon, that will be related to page experience and page performance.
I'm unfamiliar with the AMP icon. What is that?
I'm not on a mobile device, so I won't be able to see it. If you open up Google search on a mobile device and you see next to it, there's like a circle with 4 indentations inside it. That's the AMP logo. That means that's an AMP version of the page. And it should load like that.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
I know AMP means something mobile.
Accelerated mobile page.
Okay, and I know there's plugins for that, right?
Again, though, it's a real question. Necessary.
Okay.
Is it worth adding the extra resource, adding the plugin or adding the extra resource to your page to improve? Is there enough dynamic content even on yours that would require you to do something like that?
My website is a good case in point because most of the people that use my website on a regular basis, not necessarily the new visitor, but people who are taking the classes and watching the webinars and all that, generally based on my Google Analytics, most of them are desktop. I drive people to my website with other ways. I don't drive them there through Google search usually, because if you search on WordPress project management, I am not going to come up first because there's 27,000 plugins for WordPress project management. So that might have been a slight exaggeration, but there's a bunch. I'm getting further up the list, but if you put in project management for WordPress, I come up way higher. My point being is that most of the people using my site are at their desk because they're other WordPress providers. They're typically using their desk. They're not going to be taking classes on the phone. So how concerned do I need to be with that?
I think you kind of answered the question already. Probably not, in my opinion.
So it's not necessarily an across the board, everybody needs to take action and do these things so that you'll show up properly. You need to consider where your audience is coming from and that sort of thing. Of course, I would love to appear in searches for WordPress project management, and maybe over time I just might based on the SEO part of my website. But in terms of being all that concerned with mobile, if most of my users aren't coming from mobile, then although I want it to load properly and I don't want to get these messages from Google, that shouldn't be where I'm spending the majority of my time in terms of improving things. Would you agree?
Yes, with a caveat. You probably want to make sure your front end sales type pages, homepage, and other pages where people might stumble upon it on a mobile device are more focused towards that. The course side is obviously going to be really desktop focused, but you want to take into account where your audience is stumbling upon the sales versions of your page that they're getting there from in a Facebook post, for example, or something like that, where you're on Facebook more on your mobile device than you are on a desktop. At least I am.
Me too.
Because I don't want it on my desktop, and I try to do everything I can to avoid it because it's a giant, deep rabbit hole. There's a give and take with anything you're doing on a technical level. Is you have to look at, is it worth using this resource to add this fancy bell thing if it's not necessarily going to improve, or is it worth the time and expense in having somebody dive into that nitty gritty when it's really not necessary? Google and its reports will tell you, GT metrics, whatever you're using for paid performance, will tell you to do all these wonderful different things. Some of them either A, just for the just you can't do, or B, it really isn't worth the time.
Michael, this has been great. I would like to earmark to have you back to delve a little bit more into some of this more deeply. Maybe when we figure out why your microphone is dropping out every so often after we fix that. But really, this is fascinating. You can go take a class, guys. You can sign up for this guru or that guru. But when you've got somebody in your own community who really knows the stuff that you can ask these kinds of questions about, like maybe questions you can't really get to the guru that's got the $900 course for sale and all of that. And they tell you all of the generic stuff. I mean, what I like about the way that Michael has presented this to us is, well, oh, thank you for stopping the sharing. God, what is wrong with my camera? Anyway, that you're putting it in perspective to an agency owner that, yeah, this is what Google's looking at. But in this case, you need to judge whether it's the number one thing you need to be worried about or not. I think that's really, really helpful. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, these Can We Talk About Your WordPress Project videos are brought to you by the WP Project Managers Academy. For those of you who have not joined the free program and gotten started with Project Management 101, I strongly encourage you to do that. I don't really have a sales spiel, but I will tell you this, that is on the Join Us page, which is WP Roadmaps /Join Us. And everything you could possibly want to know about the program is on that page. I encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks for those of you who joined live. If you're watching the replay, if you wouldn't mind just typing replay in the chat, or that way I know there were some additional people here. If you have any questions and you're watching the replay, feel free to type those in the chat and tag Michael Gburski. He'll see the question and be able to come in and answer it. And don't worry, you're not the only one who has the question. Ask the question, Michael can answer it, and everyone can benefit. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. As always, stay productive, stay strong, and never stop learning. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate your help.
Bye, y'all. Thank you for having me.